This is the unrestricted free agent.
Oh, he's just going to go out there and kill him.
Wow.
Welcome into the program. Glad you're here. And I just pulled my microphone completely off the table.
Oh, I think South Carolina's catching Clemson. I really do. Not what we've seen so far. They haven't closed the gap.
Defense, I'm going to tell you right now, they're nasty. They're going to be nasty all year.
You know, I want to repent and apologize. I haven't really seen that.
When you see black and white and you're calling it purple, I got problems with that.
And they'll see, I told you, it's all about the deer talk.
How about that for a start? Let's get it going. Nothing like a good slow clap, right? Game day. You don't get that on this show, right? Not for the Gamecock perspective. Feel free to get that slow clap going even more. I always just think of Hoosiers when that happens. So I watched it now. I'd probably say, oh, man, that's really cheesy. But I remember loving that thing in the locker room. The slow clap. Get it going. Game day. South Carolina State. Love it. 7 o'clock tonight. Get ahead of the weather. Man, brutal stuff. Brutal video from down in Florida. Obviously, thoughts and prayers. And, man, if you have any loved ones down there, hope you've been able to make sure they're safe. I've got family outside of Orlando. I know they're highly concerned, as you might imagine. Not necessarily, I guess, where all the bad stuff was yesterday. My wife actually went to high school in Sarasota, so very familiar with that kind of area. Tough to watch. The implication for the Gamecocks, obviously, one of the few to make the adjustments in college football, but able to do it with South Carolina State on the schedule and should be able to play a little football tonight, Williams-Brice Stadium, and to have some fun. Hope you guys are optimistic, feeling good this morning, enthusiastic. You got that game day energy. It's odd, right? Especially when it gets moved up during the week. If it is on the schedule, it's one thing, right? You kind of build your week around it after that last game on Saturday. You say, okay, well, this is going to be a little bit different. We got to speed things up. But we're making the adjustment. DC in first this morning on the live chat. Roger right after with the sunny outlook. Anthony, good morning to all the UFAs and making sure we knew it's game day. Craig, completely sexist, just saying fellas, even though I only see gentlemen weighing in so far this morning. Chris on the Facebook live stream. Good morning, Tim, fellow Gamecocks. It's game day. Weird. That's a good point. Good point. Chris says he's heard it's the 5th strongest storm to hit the United States. And DC saying, long day for me. Got up at 1 to work. Probably off work around 3. Go home, get ready to head over to the game. Going to be a long day. But a good day, DC. You got football at night in September at Williams-Brice Stadium. A good day. Yeah, there's a reason you're making it a long day, right? What are you guys thinking? What's going to be a good game? How are you going to feel good? Is there anything to make you feel good about South Carolina football tonight? To me, it's got to be absolutely uncompetitive from the jump, I think, for anyone to feel real good about what you've seen from Carolina 5 games into the season in the 5th game. Adam's not feeling good this morning already. What's happened to Juice Wells? He's been missing the last 2 games. Well, you heard this being forecasted, right? Being forecasted, not aware. I think forecasted, you can go past tense. Shane Beamer, I think, was asked about Jaheim Bell after the Georgia game, maybe right before then. Maybe it was the Arkansas game where he didn't do much. It's like, this is going to happen, right? On offense, there's going to be someone that's left out with weapons. Juice Wells was leading the SEC in receiving after, 3 games after that Arkansas game? 2 games. And now he's not. Adam, the easy answer to that is South Carolina still doesn't have an identity on offense. They're still figuring it out, man. And He's been out there. He's been making plays. He was celebrating with Corey Rucker that touchdown. Adam, I will tell you this. You don't want to see Juice Wells making plays in the second half tonight. You don't. You don't want to see any Carolina starters in the game virtually at all in the second half tonight. And if you do, that means to me it hasn't been a 10, a 1 through 10 kind of performance. You get a really good game tonight, your starters don't play the second half. Maybe one drive, right? Maybe Spencer Rattler comes out, marches you down the field, gives a salute, hangs out on the sideline, maybe gives an in-game interview to ESPN. That would be strong. SEC Network. Yeah, Craig. I thought I saw a couple of Sharks dueling it out on the streets of Fort Myers yesterday. Brutal. Chris wants to see Carolina do what it did last Saturday against Charlotte, but better numbers overall. Whew. Better. Wow. You want better than 56-20? You want better than 545 yards of total offense, 295 rushing? Adam, I understand, man. I get it. You don't trust Marcus Satterfield, the Gamecocks offensive coordinator. I don't know what that is. Sorry. And I'm not telling you should. I am wondering what would make you trust him. What would earn that trust? I don't think any offensive coordinator at South Carolina will ever earn a bunch of trust against South Carolina State. This is what it is. Or Charlotte, right? But you better put up numbers. You better perform. It's not a great opportunity to earn a bunch of praise and credit and build up a bunch of trust. Not that. It's you better do this or you lose that trust, credit, any kind of goodwill. Roger says, Lloyd, more than 100 yards in the first half? I'm like you. I want to see a lot of playing time for the reserves. Again, this is not going to be a stat thing for me. This is going to be an eye test thing. What do I mean by that? Let me take a dramatic sip of coffee and then I'll explain. Eye test. Domination. You can see it, especially. This is when the bird's eye view, the 30,000, that's what they say, right? I don't know why it's 30,000. Is that the cruising altitude of most planes? Maybe it is. When you zoom out, when you sit in the upper east or upper west at Williams-Brice Stadium, it's the perfect spot to tell. You can't fool the naked eye in this instance, right? You can fool the naked eye a lot of times. This is when it absolutely tells you the story of the game. If the South Carolina team is not knocking back the other team every single time in a game like this, it's not dominant. That's not playing well for 4 quarters. There are certain games where the other team has the advantage, right? We knew Georgia was going to be the team that knocked back South Carolina most of the time. Where the two programs are. Unfortunate for the Gamecock, no doubt. Hasn't always been that way. Doesn't mean it always will be that way, but it has been that way. And it was that way this year. That's where I was shocked in game number 1 this year when it seemed to be pretty dang even. South Carolina, Georgia State. No one had a distinct advantage on the line of scrimmage. That's where I did see some massive improvement. And I never thought Charlotte would be a chance to see massive improvement. But this year's team, I mean, you got to grade each team based off of where it is, where the program is in the present. Through 3 games, really struggled offensively to move the football, especially on the ground. They moved the football on the ground and dominated the game. You get credit. Massive improvement. Game ball to the offensive line last week against Charlotte. It must happen today. Oh, how about that, Teddy? Now that's the best stat I think you can look at. If you're a numbers person, I think there is one number, and then this can get skewed too, right, Teddy? Teddy says, with like 0 injuries and 0 punts. And I hope they update the video to say it's Thursday in South Carolina. I'm sure they will. Or maybe just game day. Go generic. The punt. 0 punts against Charlotte. That's what you needed. They punt 7 times against Georgia State. At least 5, right? Way too much. But, Teddy, if they punt in the fourth quarter after the score is completely uncompetitive, doesn't count, right? No one cares. How about 0 punt through 3 quarters, through 3.5 quarters, whatever it is. You get the third team out there, and they make some mistakes, and they have to end up punting the football. I don't think you're going to be upset about it. But that might be the most impressive stat in that Charlotte game. The fact that Spencer Rattler led the offense on a scoring drive every time he was out there. So 100% scoring for Rattler as quarterback. Really, really good. And that goes hand in hand with the 0 punt, right? 0 punts the whole game. That's domination. You can't get that without moving that line of scrimmage every single time. And I think when I spoke with Corey Miller, former player Rick Sanford, they didn't say it specifically. Corey did kind of say, it's like when you're an SEC lineman and you're going against Sunbelt teams, you got to be able to be better than the other guy. Well, I think players especially want to see that domination up front, want to see that consistent push if you don't want to go that far for domination. To me, consistent push turns into domination. You just wear down that other team. But it's that eye test, and you'll see it if you're sitting in the upper stands. You'll see it every single play. If the Gamecocks aren't pushing South Carolina State back every single play, there might be some exceptions, right? You're running a screen pass, you let them through. But you guys get my gist. Straight up eye test for me in this one. Does your team look like an SEC team playing against a MEAC team? Or does this game look a lot more like game number 1 against Georgia State instead of the last game? It looks a lot more like the Charlotte game. I think you can feel good that things continue to progress. But the last thing you want here is to see what was baffling about that first half of the Charlotte game when Shane Beamer after the game says, yeah, we came in, we didn't change anything scheme-wise. Well, the defense specifically, they had to step it up from a competitive standpoint, which is supposed to be one of the core values of the program. Guys weren't playing hard enough. It's a massive problem. Completely unacceptable. Obviously, it didn't come back to bite Carolina in that game. Would be shocking if it came back to, or even came really into play from a result standpoint tonight, but it's just a fundamental issue that needs to be taken care of. I was going to say eradicated. The lack of competitive play. Accepting as a player that you're not going to give it your all or play your hardest some games, that kind of attitude has to be eradicated, right? Adam, any chance Clemson loses? Clemson's only a touchdown favorite, Adam. There's a reason that ESPN College Game Day is coming to Clemson this weekend. They don't go to games where there's 0 chance the other team wins. Now, sometimes it's a small chance. NC State is ranked number 10 in the country. They played Clemson close within the last decade a few times. Sometimes it's been a bad matchup every now and again for Clemson. Was it Jacoby Brissett back in the day? Even Fitz? We've seen this game be really, really close. Now, I'm not putting any money on Clemson losing, Adam. But I know it would make you feel a lot better. Chris says, score touchdowns, not field goals. John, good to hear from you, sir. John is our most dedicated, unrestricted free agent right now Don't take offense, everyone else, but John continues to recover in the hospital. He says, "Good morning, Tim, Gamecock Nation. It's game day. Thanks for all the thoughts, prayers, and love. Means more than you know." Attaboy, John. From MUSC in Charleston, I believe. Keep hanging in there, man. Roger says, "I realize there are 4 quarters, but would love to see USC actually score a touchdown, maybe 2, in the first quarter." How about that? That would be something, wouldn't it? All these things, I think, go into tonight. And again, this is that emotional roller coaster that college football season is. That it is for Gamecock fans in Columbia every single year. But I think especially this year, because all the optimism was back to the program in a lot of ways. I don't think there are many Carolina fans that thought the Gamecocks were going to challenge for the SEC East. Don't get me wrong here. But being back to college football relevance, when you just go up and down the field against North Carolina in a bowl game, that, I think, reaffirmed a lot of Gamecock fans for the program to kind of put it in its rightful place, if that makes any sense to you guys, from a lot of South Carolina people's perspective. South Carolina football belongs above North Carolina football, according to Gamecock fans. And I think recent history shows that for the most part, right? And to get back there after just one season with the new coach, when Mac Brown was expected last year, preseason top 10 team, Sam Howell on his way to the NFL, supposed to be tremendous. And you got to carry on Joyner out-dueling him in the bowl game. Crazy, right? But reestablished the Gamecocks in a lot of people's minds, I think. And logically, rationally, reasonably. Then when you see the start for this season, even though I think if you were being honest, if you were being fair, I think you had to know 1 and 2 was likely with Georgia and at Arkansas amongst those games. Still wasn't easy to watch, especially that Georgia game. And John updates us. MUSC right now in Charleston with some steel plates in his chest. So we will refer to John from now on as Iron Man here on the show. Tough, John. Hang in there, man. For anybody complaining today, know that John's participating in the show with steel plates in his chest from the hospital bed. So South Carolina State, Carolina tonight gets us going with what should be a great weekend. Certainly plenty of football games to get to. We'll get to that in a minute. First, wanted to get to this story. Did you guys see this? Garnet Trust there, the collective connected to Gamecock Central, announcing yesterday, everybody gets $25,000 per season, as I understand it. A name, image, and likeness deal for all USC women's basketball players. 2 national championships in 5 years will change things. The name, image, and likeness legislation, or allowing that to happen from an NCAA standpoint, has certainly changed things, and now it results in this. Good for them. It is amazing how much things have changed in college sports. And this would be the first thing that I would point to if someone asked me. An alien came down and asked me, well, how is it different now in college sports than it was 5 years ago? What about when you were in college 25 years ago? First of all, I'd say, wow, alien, you have a strange interest in college athletics. That doesn't seem to make sense. That probably wouldn't even be my first comment. It'd be weird if it was. I think I'd probably ask how many more of you are out there. What did you think about E.T.? Is that accurate at all? You know, that scared me when I went to a movie theater as a kid. Those hazmat suits, man, freaked me out. but $25,000 per year. We've seen this. What the first time I saw this was the Texas Tech Collective. I think they announced that all football players and maybe men's basketball players were connected with that as well. Get that number, and then SMU, I think, up that number to maybe 35,000 for their football team. Maybe men's basketball team is where I saw that. Did see there was one other women's basketball team that had announced something similar to this, I think, before South Carolina did. So not exactly groundbreaking, but man, and that is something, isn't it? Because women's basketball pre-Dawn Staley at South Carolina, we all understand, virtually invisible, non-existent in a lot of ways. I think there was one Elite Eight run in the Susan Walvius era, for those of you who really want to get technical. But now to have led the country in attendance for a bunch of years, won a couple of national championships in the last 5. It has resulted $25,000 name, image, and likeness deals for every single player on the team. That's like base salary. Wow. Incredible. Thanks for the patience. Got a little sniffles today. All part of the game day experience. I'm going to fight through it. Wanted to point that out. Very notable, and started practice yesterday on Staley, talking about the championship culture. Did comment on other social issues that she was asked about, the Brittany Griner deal. BYU, I guess they do not owe any money in that cancellation, I think I read. A lot of things happening around USC women's basketball as the new season begins. Major League Baseball season coming to an end down the stretch here. Looks like it's going to be all about this weekend series. Braves fall a game behind the Mets. Start the 3-game series tomorrow. How much weather will impact this thing will be interesting to see as well. But again, I will continue to reiterate it just for my own clarity with the way Major League Baseball is doing the postseason. 6 teams each league, so a total of 12 teams will get in the playoffs this year. The top 3, there are 3 division champions and then 3 wild cards. The top 2 records of the division champions get byes. So either the Mets or the Braves will get a bye from that first round. There'll be 4 of the 6 teams in each league playing in the wild card round, a best of 3 series. So it seems to be very important. We never, maybe we saw it last year or the year before. I think they've done it one time and they kept it. Is that how it worked? But of being able to avoid a first 3-game series and set yourself up for that 5-game division series from a pitching standpoint seems to me to be very important. A big advantage in the playoffs. So you want to have that option. It's not maybe a requirement to make a run for the Braves to be back-to-back World Series champs. I think it would improve the chances relatively significantly, at least 10% or so, don't you think? Makes sense to me. So, unfortunately, Atlanta losing last night in 10 innings and the Mets winning last night in 10 innings. Not what you would prefer to see from the Atlanta standpoint, but not the end of the world either. Daddy-O had no idea. Are you sure? Are you a WNBA expert? I don't find that to be. I'm going to have to check that, Daddy-O. He says the lowest WNBA players get around $10,000. I'm going to have to go minimum salary. Minimum, it's a tough word to say or spell, and for me to say. Minimum salary WNBA 2022. Those things instantly where I'm like, there it is. Yep. So, and wow, that's odd the Google search popped up former Gamecock Kayla Davis, the lowest paid player in the WNBA. It says $1,607. That doesn't seem to make any sense at all. Again, reading this straight off the internet. Take it for what it's worth. Okay, so that one was just randomly popped up. It says 8 players, including her, have salaries less than $10,000. I would think that would be some sort of anomaly. Let's go to some. All right, we got sporting news here. Let's go to that. That seems like a reputable source on WNBA salaries. It says, how much do WNBA players make in 2022? Okay. Here we go. The average salary for 2 seasons ago was $120,000. All right, let's give me the real down. Highest paid players is all we're getting here. Not helping me. I want to know the other end of the scale. Oh well. But it says undrafted rookies are $60,000. So I think that sounds like some hype to me. Obviously, some discrepancies. Braves and Mets, Roger says. Last night, both walk-offs, bottom of the 10th. Kind of ironic, for sure. Unfortunately, didn't work out like the Braves would prefer. Chris says, crazy how the scheduling works out. Last series having a lot of meaning like that. Yeah, 2-game swing, Roger. That'll do it. And then Steven randomly on the Facebook live stream, do you think we will get a 12-game or a 12-team college playoff in college football in the next 20 years? LOL. Yes, I do. But I know that the latest one was delayed. That could happen. And wanted to touch on this too. I know it was the subject of so much ridicule and mockery. Aaron Judge read an article on The Athletic, which I'd probably say way too much on this show, about how ESPN of all people should have understood how people watch sports in 2022 and how no one watching college football gave a rip about watching Aaron Judge live with a chance to hit home run number 61. No one cared. You're just ticking people off. Isn't that incredible? I said this on Monday. So I'm trying not to get on the soapbox and be that guy again. But the fact, I mean, if you don't think there's an East Coast bias or a Yankees Red Sox lean when it comes to ESPN, it's just natural, right? They're in Connecticut. That's where it is. It's where it's always been. And I know they got studios in DC for Scott Van Pelt and LA as well. And they got people all over the country and all over the world. But still, the fact that some executive somewhere okayed, yes, let's cut into Clemson Wake Forest for live Aaron Judge stuff. Oh, no, it's okay. We'll just make it half screen. So that'll be good, right? But make sure to take the Aaron Judge audio and just leave the very important first top 25 matchup between these teams since 1950 game. Let's leave that on the side. But we got to hear what Aaron Judge is doing live. Unbelievable. I mean, completely tone deaf. Just me, whoever made that decision, didn't go to a football school. Probably from the greater New York or Boston area, I would imagine. Hasn't apparently seen baseball ratings in the last 30 years. So silly. Like, I mean, good for Aaron Judge. Don't get me wrong. I don't like the Yankees. Braves guy. Yankees winning, beating them in the 90s in the World Series and continuing to win World Series after World Series with massive free agent signings. Just being, they're too good. too good. And there were too many people around me in the South who are Yankees fans, just seem to be bandwagon jumpers, and I just I lump anyone that's a Yankees fan into that category. Now, if you're from New York, then I can give you a bit of a pass. But was around way too many bandwagon jumpers. You just wanted to be a fan of a winner. But I've told you guys before, we had former Gamecock assistant coach Stuart Lake on here during his time down at Charleston Southern, or maybe the Citadel, I forget which. But Aaron Judge was a Charleston River Dog, and he threw batting practice to him. He's the nicest guy. He seems to be, about as easy to pull for as I've seen in baseball. Tied Roger Maris, and I think it's 61 years later, too, after Maris did it, which is crazy. It is, right? 1961 it happened. Here we are 61 years later. There's home run number 61. Baseball's nuts. Sports is nuts that way, isn't it? So good for Aaron Judge, but don't take away from my college football. Don't tell me I have to think this is the greatest thing ever. I don't. Impressive, man. Heck of a year. He's a great baseball player. Don't tell me I got to care about it more than my college football. Craig says I'd rather watch Judge Judy. Strong. It's like it's all scripted out, Chris says. LOL. If the Braves do win back-to-back World Series, does Brian Snicker become the best Atlanta Braves manager? Good question, Steven. Never thought of it. Should probably pop something else up so you guys don't have to see me blow my nose, right? It's a great thing about radio, by the way. You can do that. Never know. I think you certainly got to consider it, Steven. He's going to say it's going to take a lot, in my mind, to take over that role that Bobby Cox has. But, well, Snicker would definitely be a better postseason manager. And Bobby Cox wasn't that. He's the anti-Joe Torre in that way. So I guess it would just depend on how much you value the championship. And then Snicker's amazing story, too, just being in the organization as a minor league guy for most of his career. I got no problem with that. But that's a long ways off. A lot of wins away for the Braves. Long way to go there. And again, this weekend going to be really, really weird if weather significantly impacts that. But that's why we have football tonight. All right, let's go with, again, typically we do score predictions on a game day. Feel free to throw those out there if you're in the mood. I feel like this one is different. Anytime you play an FCS opponent, you don't even really get lines like you normally do for big-time college football. I'm sure there's some lines out there that you can place some units on if you really want to. And I would imagine it's close to 30-ish. I'm sure some of you guys have seen it. I'm not overly interested in that. And I don't think ultimately the final score is going to be the thing that most people are concerned about tonight, assuming it goes how it needs to go from the Gamecock perspective. Because make no bones about it, you got to win the game handily to be anywhere close to feeling good moving forward. With the wind, Steven says, I go 38-7 Carolina. Seems pretty fair. I think it's much more about playing better or continuing to improve and playing anywhere close to efficient, clean football for the Gamecocks. Getting to feel better about the Gamecock offense again in general. I think you do feel a little bit better. How much is kind of based on, I think, your levels of optimism But watching Marshawn Lloyd go nuts last week has to make you feel better about the Gamecock run game. If you are anything but a negative Nelly. Is that putting it negatively, saying it like that way? If you have some optimism to you, right? If you want to be able to feel better, if you are anywhere close to fair and open-minded, I think obviously you got to give the Gamecocks some credit for that. Chris says it's really about being consistent offensively and defensively. Agreed. And to me, consistent was last week, no punt. Last week, every time Spencer Rattler was in the game, on those drives, you scored points. That's consistent, man. That's what you want to see this week. And so much more as opposed to, we could go to poll question out there, right? What would you rather see? Marshawn Lloyd over 100, 150 yards, offense over 500 plus yards, defense forcing turnovers, defense getting sacks, limiting them to 300 total yards, anything like that. I don't think those are the most important things. Those pale in comparison, in my opinion, to tonight's eye test, to tonight's feel at Williams-Brice. Gamecock fans need to leave Williams-Brice tonight feeling like they got a shot in the next 7 games. The only way you do that is by taking control of the game early and dominating it. Seeing a lot more of what Carolina fans saw in the third quarter against Charlotte throughout the game. You can't see a repeat of last week and leave Williams-Brice tonight, in my opinion, feeling good about the next 7 games. You say, well, that score is 56-20. Yeah, but you were up 6 at half. That ain't getting it. That performance will not win you any game the rest of the season. Any. Vanderbilt will beat you if you play the way that Carolina played in the first half last week. Chris has another chance tonight to work out all the kinks. Yep, you have some freedom, right? You got some latitude. Coaches know that going in. There's a reason they're playing Thursday night. Don't believe you can believe it. There is respect between the programs, right? But there is also a significant difference between the University of South Carolina and South Carolina State. It's crazy that SC State has the 4 Hall of Famers, right? And the Gamecocks have none. So not only am I think the most interesting part of tonight, let's put it this way, will be how we see Carolina play in the first half, especially not being a first half team, especially first quarter with all the struggles. Can you shore that up? You need to check that one off the list, right? Last week you checked off run game. That was a massive box. I mean, a Grand Canyon-like hole in the resume. And it got checked off. 295 yards? Check. Should have been checked off, by the way. I'm not trying to overhype and say, wow, what an impressive performance, and the Gamecock offensive line and run game is back, baby. It's going to be one of the best in the SEC. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying you did what you needed to do against Charlotte. Well, now you need to do that, and you need to do it a lot sooner than when it happened against Charlotte, against SC State. I think we all understand that. And I think it's a pretty high bar in that way, right? That you got to be dominant from the jump for your fans to feel good moving forward. It's a pretty high bar. Josh, like your mindset, says, good morning, UF Ace. Who's tailgating already? If you're tailgating already, either you're just a savage and maybe in your 20s, or you have major problems, or you're a rookie doing it 10 and a half hours before game time, and you'll never make it. or you just tailgate a lot differently than most of us. York's already tailgating, Craig says. Good work, Craig. Poor guy had to change a lot of logistics. Had a big Saturday tailgate plan, and now it's down to 5 or 6 people. But that's the great thing about tailgating, right? Your group of 5 or 6 people can grow to 15, 20, 30 real quick if you're in the right location, if the conditions come together. Doesn't the move to adjust this game look smarter and smarter to you guys? I know it's really easy to criticize an athletic director, an administration, any type of official moves from a university because of everything that's involved. There's a lot of stuff involved, and it can be difficult to move quickly, to be nimble. Morning to you, Kens. But I don't know if I know of a move that is more universally kind of accepted and viewed as positive. Universally positive might be the best way to put it. Just from a all around, right? Football standpoint, makes a lot of sense. Logistical standpoint, more difficult for sure to have a Thursday night game than the scheduled Saturday game, but as long as traffic isn't a total nightmare tonight and people can get in and out of the stadium and the Gamecock faithful showing is not less than 50,000 or something that would be a bit embarrassing, which, by the way, I've noticed that Lane Kiffin's kind of throwing up his hands and saying, man, I'm trying to get people there, but I don't know what it is. So I mentioned that just to make sure that you understand that it is a challenge in college football at most college football venues to get people in there. And South Carolina does deserve credit. Again, the athletics department, university deserves credit for, if not being out ahead on this, at least keeping up, right? The upgrades have come consistently here in the last few years. More air-conditioned areas, more amenities, alcohol sales in the stadium, the LED lights, the presentation is really, really good. And that's what Gamecock fans deserve. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that there are other places out there who have better football teams. Ole Miss is a better football team right now than South Carolina. I don't think that's a question. And if you're going to fight me on that, or you think that's not true, I don't know what you've been watching. Wow, 39.5 is what you've seen, Josh. Yeah, those FCS lines are nuts to me. Ken says being able to drink in the game is nice too. I mean, it made all the sense in the world, right? You can make a ton of money off of it. You can actually curb some tailgating because people don't feel like they have to fit all of that activity in pregame or sneak it in during the game. And you charge ridiculous prices, but people will pay. Premium type deal. Chris says working in Charleston today, already really windy. I think it'll be the same tonight. Looks like it's going to be another good running night. I mean, like, take a jog, Chris? Is that what you're talking about? Or to run the football? Maybe that makes more sense, right? A good night to run the football, I'm guessing, instead of throwing it in the wind. I mean, that's the thing about Williams-Brice, man. Very rarely have I can't remember a game where wind has affected being able to throw the football. It's a part of, I think, just how the stadium's designed as well. You get a massive stadium that goes up as opposed to going down. It's tough to get a bunch of wind going in there. DC still feeling a little salty after that Georgia loss. Unless we improve a bunch, I don't see us making it to 6 wins. I think it's pretty fair, DC. I think Shane Beamer would probably agree with you. Yeah, Craig, good point. I meant to point that out. I retweeted that the other day. South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, the only 3 schools in the SEC with sellouts so far. It's an important stat, man. That might be the most important, most impressive stat for South Carolina, I think, so far this year. The fact that they sold out that Charlotte game, and I get it. It wasn't jam-packed to the rafters. Not that the rafters exist in an outdoor stadium. The ramps weren't overflowing in the corners of Williams-Brice Stadium for Charlotte, but they were able to sell enough tickets to announce a sellout. Impressive. And Shane Beamer doesn't have the same issue that Lane Kiffin has and most college football programs have. Almost desperate to get people into the stadium for games. Not an issue at Carolina. And that does matter. It matters, I think, most in recruiting, but then it also matters in games. Doesn't matter tremendously. I thought those people saying, oh, Georgia's in for something. It's their first true road environment and the whole thing. Come on. But it can play a bit of an impact. We all know that. It is much easier to play at home than it is on the road in the SEC. Teddy D, minimal tailgating for my gang, but I'll have 3 of us in section 22, 1 in the students section. We are in full support. Well done, Teddy D. RH. Right, Roger says, Mike Morgan was saying last night how bad the crowd was at Miami last week against Middle Tennessee. Said they only show up for big games. Roger, that's not breaking news. That's what Miami has been forever. And they just saw the opposite, too. That's got to be really disheartening as a player, right? Miami was ranked 13th in the country going to Texas A&M, which had fallen from 6 to, what it was, 23 or something, after getting upset at home by Appalachian State, and still 107,000 people showed up at Kyle Field for that game. 106 plus thousand of them probably Aggie fans, right? To me, in that way, Texas A&M is a great fit in the SEC. Miami kind of defines an ACC football mentality in a lot of ways with their support. Now, there are exceptions. Clemson, an exception. Virginia Tech, Florida State, all exceptions, football schools. But I think South Carolina fans don't have to take a backseat to any of those fan bases when it comes to showing up, supporting their team. RH, will Josh Vann finally step up tonight? Great question, RH. Gamecock offense needs him. You can't keep saying, I mean, obviously, when you get sound effects involved on the program, clearly, I'm saying things that are adding points to the show. Point tally will be in the 3rd hour today, as we're streaming from 8 to 10 every single day. But you can't keep saying, as a head coach, if you're Shane Beamer, as an offensive coordinator, if you're Marcus Satterfield, which, by the way, got a pass on his weekly press conference yesterday, he and Clayton White both, because of the way the game has been moved up, the way the schedule has been shifted this week. Plan on hearing from him, though, next Wednesday. But Marcus Satterfield can't walk into that press conference and continue to talk about all the weapons they have on offense if Josh Vann has 1 catch tonight for 8 yards again, and Jaheim Bell has a similar type line. You just can't. At some point, that credit that you're giving to your players turns into criticism from your fans to your coaches. Then if you're telling us you got players, this was the Will Muschamp year number 3, right? Most competitive depth you've had, and you have a dog season like that, then what are you doing, man? That's on you. If you got a bunch of playmakers, you told us you got an NFL quarterback, NFL tight ends, NFL wide receivers, then look like it, right? Put it out there. Make it happen. And if not, how can we as outsiders come to any other conclusion than you're not a good coach? That's what that is. And so that's why there's kind of a small margin of error for the Gamecocks in that way, for I think the fan base to leave Williams-Brice tonight feeling good about the rest of the season. Now, how much that has to do with the rest of the season? Probably very little, right? If you don't play well tonight against SC State, you're not dominant from the jump, and you go pull a upset in Lexington next week, nobody cares. We will have wasted our breath tomorrow morning, next week, just complaining on social media immediately, right? Wasted your typing energy. Josh says the Kentucky game next week will tell me a lot about how good we will be this year. And see, I don't even know if that's true, right? Because Kentucky's really, really good, it seems like. I mean, Josh, you would agree before the season that I think you would have been surprised if this team could pull off a win against a top 10 team on the road. I think that would be very fair, that you wouldn't put your money on it before this season, that you're going to knock off a top 10 team on the road. Because isn't the only road win in Shane Beamer's pretty brief tenure last year, it was barely scraping out a win at East Carolina, right? There were no more road wins, were there? Not off the top of my head. And not even really good road performances. Was that Missouri game last year on the road? Almost beat them. Is the game on TV tonight, Chris says. Yes, sir. SEC Network. Same crew that was going to do it on Saturday has been able to do it on Thursday. Again, kudos to everybody involved, making this a near seamless transition in a lot of ways. Dave Neal, play-by-play guy. Aaron Murray, former Georgia quarterback, doing the color commentary tonight. My apologies to the sideline reporter. If you guys know it, top of your head, feel free to throw it in the live chat. Yeah, Craig says when you have to drive 45 minutes from campus to watch a game in Miami, that's what you get. Josh, getting back to the Gamecocks. Bell has to get more touches somehow. It baffles me that we've seen this for a year and a half now. No, Josh, you got to give credit where credit is due. Jaheim Bell looked like a next level player in that bowl game. They figured out how to get him some touches and get him matchups and take advantage of it, right? For that to be anyone's expectation is ridiculous, right? That Jaheim Bell's going to be that guy every single game. Carolina's got him his touches. How many touches? He got double-digit touches, I believe, in game number 1 against Georgia State this year. It was obviously a point of emphasis to get Jaheim Bell the ball. I think they thought the best player on offense should get him the ball. And he didn't produce. And after the game, we learned that I think a lot of the coaching staff blamed the perimeter blocking for that, especially when they would hand him off, said they got whipped on the perimeter. Massive concern. DC says a win tonight. Most people are saying Vandy and Missouri. I'm not confident in beating either one, but if we do, who would be the 6th win? Well, that would be the 6th win, right? No, my math's no good, right? We're 2-2 is the record going into tonight. You win your 3rd one, you beat Missouri and Vandy. That would be 5 wins, right? So DC is not even confident in winning those games. Who would be the 6th win right now? Good point. The most likely candidate right now would be Florida, right? Not saying something about Carolina's schedule? 7 games left after tonight. Vandy, the only one that I see you're definitely going to be favored against. I think Missouri will probably be favored by a couple of points against South Carolina at this point when they play. Let me double check. I'm a dummy about whether that game's home or away. You would think, I've been out in Missouri a couple of times. You would think I would know if it was an even year or an odd year, but that's not how my brain worked. My apologies. Let's go South Carolina football schedule. Make sure I get this right. 22. Sorry. Not happy with myself about this. So it's in Columbia. Yeah, last year in Columbia. What a dummy I am. Of course, the Missouri game is in Columbia. It's in South Carolina this year. Yeah. What other game are you looking at on the schedule right now where you're saying, oh, yeah. That looks good? Because you got number 5 in Clemson, number 7 in Kentucky, number 8 in Tennessee. On the road at number 7, on the road at number 5. You do have Tennessee at home. You're at Vandy, where I think you still will be favored. You've got Missouri at home, so South Carolina probably will be favored by a few points, knowing they're playing at home. You got Texas A&M at home, in Florida on the road. Right now, you might think you got a better chance to beat Texas A&M than you do Florida. I'd say pretty similar, with that game being played where it is, with Texas A&M at Williams-Brice and going to the Swamp. DC outmatched against Florida, Tennessee, A&M, and Clemson. You're putting those 4 games in there. Okay, I disagree about Florida. I think we did see that game last year, right? John, we will beat Missouri and Vanderbilt. People that say we won't are pessimistic. Certainly not optimistic. Let's see, DC is, I don't know if he's closer to realistic than pessimistic. I think he's probably closer to pessimistic right now. But I think it is realistic, John. I think you got to agree with me that 6 wins right now for South Carolina isn't an easy case to make. Let's put it that way. And this is coming from a guy I thought they would win 5 games last year. They ended up winning 7. I think I went 5-7. I don't think I went 4-8. This year, I thought Carolina would go 7-5. They still certainly could, but I thought we would see more through 4 games than we've seen. The 4th game, the most encouraging, I think we would all agree. Game number 2 against Arkansas was a little bit better, or about what I expected, actually. It's almost exactly what I expected from this year's team, which made me think the program was headed in the right direction, and that 7-5 was kind of on track. Georgia game was a big step back. Georgia State game, I thought, was a big step back. But again, it's all part of the larger picture, and in college football especially, 1 week doesn't necessarily reflect what's going to happen the next week. And we think we know sometimes, and we got no idea. Right? Notre Dame, Marshall, and then now Marshall's turned around and lost a couple games, I think. Appalachian State at Texas A&M, and App State's turned around. They just lost to James Madison. Crazy. But it's the beauty of it too, right? The beauty of it. But I think the only thing that we can say for sure a third of the way in is that any of those wildly optimistic Gamecock fans were being just that going into this season. And yet still, I don't know if we were convinced. Let's just go recent history last year, right? Where was Carolina 4 games in last year? Let's play that game. I'm going to look up that schedule. No, it was in Illinois and East Carolina last year, first 2 games. So it started well. Well, it started with 2 wins. That East Carolina game was massively concerning, I think. Then it was Georgia and Kentucky. So 4 games in with that close game against Kentucky, 16-10 was the final score. Georgia in Athens, and at least you put 13 points on the board, and it wasn't massively embarrassing. You had Shane Beamer responding emotionally after the game. 4 games in last year, I think fair to say, ahead of where this team is this year. Maybe on par if you're optimistic. That game number 2 performance at East Carolina, a big cause for concern. You did end up winning the football game. You didn't play well. It wasn't against a big-time opponent, but you avoided disaster. It was the first road game that Shane Beamer ever was a head coach in, right? And then that Kentucky game, you were in that game to win it. South Carolina fans don't like losing to Kentucky. Don't expect it. Don't stand for it in a lot of ways. But Kentucky turned out to be pretty good. Last year, game number 5 was Troy, a 9-point win at home. And then the embarrassing loss at Tennessee the following week. So just giving you that as a little bit of context. Morning, Jason. Thanks for joining the program. Troy, nobody saw South Carolina beating Florida or Auburn last year, so you never know. Great point, Troy. Exactly what I was trying to get to, right? Roger says, I think tonight, 45-14. Hopefully get out in front from the get-go. I'll be working, but split between following that game and Woodruff High School at Chester. The Wolverines have their work cut out for them. I had no idea it was the Woodruff Wolverines. Good stuff. Tough for me to say. Drinkwitz has our number. I'm not counting that as a win at Missouri or against Missouri, and Vandy will upset someone with Mike Wright. They might. He's a heck of an athlete for sure. That 87-yard touchdown run against Hawaii was crazy. Chris says 42-10. What he's looking for tonight. I think that seems about right. I'm interested to see how this defense plays. A healthier defense, 56-3, Jason says. If it's that, I think Gamecock fans will feel pretty good. And then I say that, and Troy, the resident Clemson fan, says 49-10 tonight. I say that. I think there is a way it can be 56-3, and yet fans still not feel great about it, if that makes any sense to you. Carolina scored 56 points last week, right? There's still some fans that don't want to give, some South Carolina fans that don't want to give their own team a lot of credit for it. If it's 13-3 at half, it ends up 56-3, for instance. That's what I'm talking about. After last season, this staff constantly harped on our biggest weakness was quarterback. We brought in Rattler, and people started drinking the Kool-Aid, DC says. We got to talk about this. Hold up. As we do that, as we get in hour number 2, and really appreciate you guys being a part of the program, let's give Shane Beamer's offensive outlook again on this game. I think it's very notable. And then we'll get into more of DC's comment here about where the coaching staff was, and then maybe, because to me, this is about how he's kind of thinking about it as well. Here's Shane from Tuesday talking about his offensive outlook against SC State.
Continue to run the ball efficiently, continue to get the ball to these playmakers, the multiple playmakers that we have on our offense, and just get better in the passing game as well also. So, it's not like anything coming out of Charlotte was a eye-opener. If you look at everything from like a 30,000-foot view of the last 4 games, I mean, it's a lot of the same things I knew going into Arkansas and coming out of Arkansas as well. Now we just got to operate more consistently as well, and continue to get better.
I think that 30,000-foot view is really interesting because, again, that's how I will see tonight's game. It needs to be dominant from that view for the Gamecock, because last week was a confidence booster offensively, especially offensive line. Hey, they can move people. They can run the football. It can happen with this group. I think the Georgia State game was the exact opposite. Zero confidence. I think you had to have as a Gamecock fan that Carolina's going to be able to run the ball. And then Shane Beamer can say it all he wants to, that Georgia made him feel better about it, but it didn't make any Carolina fans feel better when you're down 48-0. Get a garbage time touchdown. Josh, this is a good point too. I want a TD on the opening possession. Roger, Carolina is going to be 3-2 after tonight. That's the record I thought they'd have after 5 games. BW not so convinced. SC State's going to be a tougher matchup than Charlotte. They got some talent on that team. But I think Charlotte showed it has a little talent as well, especially Chris Reynolds, their quarterback. Man, the first half, he's making plays. So, Troy, you were with me then before the season for the Gamecocks. 4 probable wins, 4 probable losses, and 4 toss-ups. That's exactly how I broke down the schedule, too. Yeah, let's get back to DC's thought. After last season, this staff constantly harped on our biggest weakness was quarterback. They brought in Spencer Rattler, and people started drinking the Kool-Aid. I don't remember the staff constantly harping on it. Now, Marcus Satterfield was definitely defensive when he was asked, hey, man, you got a lot of criticism after year number 1. How do you think you did? Or how do you handle that? Like, well, with the quarterback situation, I'd like to see I'd put what we did last year up against anyone, I think was the exact quote, right? So there's that. But outside of that, I don't remember the coaching staff harping on quarterback being a massive weakness because you still got one of those guys as your backup quarterback and presumably still the quarterback of the future in Luke Doty. People just forget about him now or given up on him. He did throw the longest touchdown of the game last week. I know he threw a pick coming in too. But he's still there. I don't remember Shane Beamer ever just throwing guys under the bus and making fun of Zeb Nolan or anything like that. I mean, Carrion Joyner was also a quarterback last year for the bowl game, or at least half of it. So it wasn't just that, DC. And bringing in a transfer quarterback and bringing in the preseason Heisman Trophy favorite, there are differences there, right? But then you add other pieces too. Oklahoma tight end, a couple of lower level school wide receivers who put up big numbers in Juice Wells and Corey Rucker. But it wasn't just that. It was other things as well. And also the fact that they did pull off the wins they did last year. What Troy reminded us of, right? Florida, Auburn, North Carolina. You could not have predicted that at this time last season. A 3-point win at East Carolina did not spell you can beat Florida, Auburn, and North Carolina. Beating Troy at home by 9 did not give Carolina a lot of confidence, not Carolina fans for sure, that they could win those games. Right, Chris? First of all, Carolina didn't have to start 4 quarterbacks. I mean, they allowed Jason Brown to transfer in, right? If he was good enough to take over after Luke Doty's injury, then it would have been 2 quarterbacks, right? One because of injury, and then you got your backup. But he wasn't even good enough to beat out a graduate assistant coach who came in a few weeks before the season. And when I say good enough, I just mean obviously by the coach's standard, their evaluation. They played Zeb Nolan for a reason. Jason Brown ended up transferring out for a reason. He didn't win the job at Virginia Tech for a reason. None of this is personal. It's just based off of football stuff. I think I don't even have to qualify that on this show, right? You guys are, by and large, I think, rational human beings and not sensitive snowflakes. So, Chris, I think you got to be careful and how you point that. Had to start 4 quarterbacks. Absolutely not. And even the starting quarterback of Dacarrion Joyner in the bowl game, I think a bit of a stretch, knowing how he and Zeb Nolan kind of split the snaps in that game. So that's what they did, and that's what happened as well. That it happened, so you got to acknowledge it. DC, I think this was more a matter of pulling off those big wins and the way fandom works in a lot of ways is that it's a lot easier for a lot of, I think, good fans, optimistic fans that want to see their team win and want to enjoy the season as much as possible. It's a lot easier to forget some of those tough moments, especially in the first year of a head coach's tenure, first year of a program really trying to renew itself, if not rebuild. And then instead, remember the really good moment. Remember just dominating Florida at home. Remember pulling off an upset win against Auburn. Remember running up and down against North Carolina. Those things happen, man. I didn't hear a bunch of preseason hype from Carolina coaches. I get it if you want to be angry and say that, no, that's exactly what you heard. I heard a coaching staff, a head coach specifically, doing an excellent job walking that line between not being a wet blanket on your own fan base and not still wanting to inspire confidence in your players and your program with how you talk about them positively in a public way and still not writing checks that you can't cash. Now that's where I'm at with this coaching staff tonight offensively. Stop with the we got a bunch of weapons on offense talk. It ends tonight if you don't dominate the game. Stop it. Or change offensive coordinators. That's where I'm at with Gamecock football going into game number 17 in the Shane Beamer era. Stop it. You don't have a bunch of offensive weapons on paper that have proven their offensive weapons consistently. You don't. Marshawn Lloyd's career high going into the last week was 55 yards in a game. That's not a weapon. Doing it one time against Charlotte, that ain't good enough, right? You got to prove it on the field. And Shane Beamer said it, right? Got to be more consistent. He knows. And I think Shane is the savviest that I've seen as a head coach. Understanding. I mean, Steve Spurrier was really good at that too. But he was at such a different place in his career and was kind of infamously very short in his public praise a lot of times. Very, what's the word I'm looking for? Thrifty? It's not quite it. What is it? The opposite of greedy? Stingy. Stingy. That's the word nerd I was looking for. He was kind of infamously stingy with his public praise, especially of quarterback. And Shane Beamer's not that. And he shouldn't be, right? He can't do a Spurrier impression. Chris, I'm tired of hearing we had a good practice. They look good in practice. I understand. I get it. But you're not tired of hearing that, Chris. You're tired of hearing that and then not seeing them look good in the game. And that was my problem with Gamecock fans and their criticism a lot of times of Will Muschamp. You weren't mad at what he was saying. You were just mad at him losing games. Getting embarrassed a lot of times defensively, being a defensive guru. How does that happen? It wasn't what he said, man. Sometimes it was how he said it. That's what you were getting to begin with. So, Chris, you gotta realize, man, I get it. You're tired of hearing certain things. But what you're really tired of what you see. That really determines your feeling. And certainly no fan ever wants to hear, man, these guys look really good in practice and they don't look good in the game, or you see them not look good in the game. Oh, yeah, that's hard. Because then what kind of program do you have? Then you have like a Muschamp like program, right? It's all about the preparation, the whole thing, as opposed to the Spurrier type program. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, they can do it in practice, but it's a different thing to do in the game. Man, I love talking about football with you guys. And this is a week, a great week that exemplifies the beauty of college football to me, especially in the state of South Carolina, where this is the second straight week. It's just a get-right game for the Gamecocks, right? Nationally, zero interest in this game. And yet, here it is going to be a Thursday night game on the SEC network. Carolina has figured out how to get an advantage going into a huge game at Kentucky. They mobilized the entire state, basically, to make an adjustment. And still, going into this game, there's some benchmarks, might be the best way to put that. There are certain things that Gamecock fans have to see, I think, to feel good about the rest of the season. Have to see, especially offensively. And defense, I think Clayton White has earned enough of a pass, right? And how they turned that game around in the second half last week and absolutely dominated Charlotte like they should have, but looked like an SEC defense, causing turnovers, getting after the quarterback, not allowing Charlotte to run the football like they should have. Seeing a much more consistent game in and game out performance in year number one defensively, a lot better numbers defensively than offensively last year. Clayton White is in a different spot than Marcus Satterfield as a Gamecock coordinator. Now what happens tonight, right? The story continues. The next chapter is written. Chris says, I quit drinking during the work week, but I think I'll have to crack a few open tonight. Yeah, you get a pass on the Thursday night game, especially with hurricane situation. Okay, so you got this going down for Carolina, and while this is going down, Kentucky's up next. And I mentioned Lane Kiffin struggling to get fans. Ole Miss, him feeling like he needs to beg people to fill up the stadium. Much different place than South Carolina's at, selling out the first 3 games. Kentucky's at Ole Miss this week. I mean, double advantage for the Gamecocks in that way, right? Carolina going to Kentucky next week, now having 2 extra days to prepare, playing a Thursday night game. Playing a non-conference, much weaker opponent. Now, Kentucky's going on the road, playing a team that is favored by 6.5 points. Ole Miss is looking for a top 10 victory, notch on the belt, physical football team. I mean, physical is not the right way to put it. A team that can run the football. Kentucky is going to get all it can handle, I think, in a lot of ways. So you can't draw it up much better from the Gamecock perspective. And I think that is why we've heard, I think it was Josh and others this week, but Josh just a few minutes ago say, well, next week's going to tell me what I really want to know about this team. And I get it. Because Ole Miss wins this game and they win it. They cover the spread, and Kentucky drops to pretty much where Ole Miss is right now in the rankings. Much more like 15 as opposed to fringe top 5. I think from the Gamecock perspective, you would prefer Kentucky to win this game, wouldn't you? You don't want them to look dominant by any stretch of the imagination and just kind of click on all cylinders. But maybe Will Levis makes a play late to win them the game by a few points. You'd love to see Ole Miss score plenty of points. This game to be in the 30s maybe. But you'd prefer Kentucky feeling good about itself as opposed to having something to prove and feeling like they need to win at home to preserve a New Year's Day bowl game type of season. But you want to see that thing just be a smash mouth, take a physical toll on both teams kind of game, I think. And that's not what tonight should be for the Gamecocks for sure. So advantage, kind of double advantage for the Gamecocks in that way. Move it up 2 days. And yeah, I think you're right, Josh. Chris Rodriguez set to be back for Kentucky after the offseason DUI. The suspension. No, I didn't say suspension. Weird Mark Stoops press conference. but that one will certainly be one to watch. And then you'll probably be able to see, I'm guessing, the Ole Miss home atmosphere, which, I mean, imagine if South Carolina had Lane Kiffin as head coach. They're number 14 in the country, taking on the number 7 team in the country. Williams-Brice would absolutely sold out. Be nuts. Different type of football environment, tailgating environment at Ole Miss. A little bit more laid back. And difficult to get people in the stands, which is, I think, hard for a lot of South Carolina people in general to wrap their brains around. How about this thing, man? 17.5, again, the spread. And I haven't updated these spreads, so they might have changed by 0.5 or a point. If they have, please let me know. But Alabama going to Arkansas. And brutal loss for Arkansas last week. Off the top of the upright. Had a chance to keep kind of a dream season going in a lot of ways. Or to go in this game in a much different direction. Let's put it that way. And now you got to play Bama at home, 17.5 point favorite. Back to Carolina, Roger says, it won't be the case tonight, I hope, but Lloyd seems to be the type of back that needs to carry the ball a lot to be effective. I hope we see that starting with Kentucky. This is a fascinating comment, sir. Roger says because hopefully he's only in for the first half tonight. But this is fascinating because what does that mean exactly? If you need to carry the ball a lot to be effective, are you a really good running back? I would argue no. And South Carolina's offense isn't the type of offense right now that can afford to wait on a running back to become effective. They can't. And clearly they haven't. Right? Marcus Satterfield has shown us that. He said many times he needs to be more patient and trust the running game and the whole thing. But it took Shane Beamer, clearly seems like this to me. You guys correct me if you have a different perspective on this. It took Shane Beamer telling Marcus Satterfield point blank, I want us to run the ball 40 times against Charlotte. He ran the ball exactly 40 times against Charlotte. And Marshawn Lloyd went nuts. But what are the odds of that continuing in the SEC? And how many 3 and outs are you going to get if you hand him the ball 2 out of those 3 times? You're going to do that 5 times to get the double-digit carries? You can't. So I understand the difficulty, the conundrum, the conflict I feel like that we're seeing Marcus Satterfield try to work through as an offensive coordinator for Carolina. It's an interesting spot to be in. I don't think he is that type of back, Roger. I do think it's just natural that running backs, especially a guy like him who will just as soon jump over you or run over you, he can do both. Or make a move and go by you. I think he has what you got to have to be a really good SEC running back. You got to be able to do kind of all 3 of those things, right? Make a move and go by somebody, run through them, and then, well, in his case, go over them. So maybe those 2 things, right? You got to get around someone or go through them. He can do both. But he hasn't been able to do it at such a level to overcome what I certainly perceive, and I think most of us do from the outside, a subpar offensive line. Maybe they found something last week. I love that Shane Beamer came out and told us, hey, they were running counter mostly, little inside zone. Not afraid to just put it out there. Here's what we did. Everybody that is an opposing coach is going to see it on tape anyway. We're not surprising anybody. So can you keep it going? You have to be able to keep it going against SC State for Gamecock fans to have any kind of confidence you're going to do it in SEC play. And that's where Carolina goes into tonight. So, Roger, if you don't see Marshawn Lloyd or another running back, could be Juju McDowell, Carolina fans don't care necessarily who's running the ball well. They just want somebody running the ball well, right? They don't care who it is. Would love it for it to be Marshawn Lloyd. I think he's a really easy guy to pull for, but so is Juju McDowell. And I think there is cause for concern with McDowell, especially in pass protection, just at his size. He's not the prototypical SEC running back. He does not have what it takes to be an every down back, just size-wise. No knock on him. I mean, his heart is huge. He brings other things to the table for sure. But if you don't see the South Carolina run game effective in the first half against South Carolina State, massive problem. I think the better way to put this, to think about this, Roger, I think, is the South Carolina running game instead of Marshawn Lloyd specifically. Is the South Carolina run game the type of run game that needs to run the ball 20 times to be effective, 15 times to be effective? That's a different thing, right? That would be more like an offensive line issue to me, that they have to have that many reps to either start doing it effectively, to start executing effectively, or to start being able to push people around. And that's a weird spot. Haven't heard that in a while. Scat back, huh, Chris? Good when in open space. Yeah, but he's good in between the tackles too, man. He's not just that. I would say good, not great, right? Not, you got to have a great running back to be an upper echelon SEC guy, especially if you don't have a dominated offensive line, which Carolina doesn't. RL says, are y'all expecting rain and wind gusts down there tonight? Not sure. I haven't checked the weather lately. But again, wind is typically not an issue at Williams-Brice. I don't think it's going to be the calmest of nights. So there'll probably be a little bit of that. Roger says, honestly, with our offensive line's ineptitude, Lloyd will probably be underutilized. Yeah, we'll see. Josh, good point. Receivers need to block better as well to be effective. Screen plays getting blown up way too often because of poor blocking. It's a great point. And maybe Corey Rucker can help improve that. It was odd that we didn't see him until the end of the game get in last week, but he kind of told us why. He was out of shape, man. Just had a stress fracture in the foot, so hasn't been able to get the reps to get the wind up to where it needs to be able to be as effective as he needs to be. Yeah, Josh, maybe that's part of it too. Maybe Christian Beal-Smith will get on the field with Marshawn Lloyd or Juju McDowell some. Yeah, he's a force in the backfield. I mean, you don't lead Wake Forest in rushing last year and not know what you're doing, but he's not just good with the ball in his hand. And also, you got the transfer tight end as well in that played a bunch last week in kind of an H-back role. Greg Atkins' kid. I think there again, this is where you're hearing still a work in progress, right? This is why you're still hearing that. They're still trying to figure out what works best against other teams who have prepared for you like they prepared for you. All right, more games on Saturday as we go through the schedule chronologically. While Alabama's playing Arkansas, Wake Forest, and Florida State. How you guys feeling about Florida State this year? Been a punchline recently, right? I think Clemson, this is something Clemson fans and Gamecock fans can probably unite on. No problems feeling good about Florida State not being good. I think both teams benefiting in recruiting in a lot of ways with all the Florida guys that both schools pull. This year's Florida State seems to be different. They seem to be back by any stretch of the imagination. They cracked the top 25 here, dominating against Boston College last week. Massive win that almost didn't finish against LSU in the opener. Jordan Travis goes down. The Louisville win, to me, was the big difference in Florida State this year. That on the road against a team that's kind of still desperate for wins, like Louisville was after getting thumped by Syracuse to start the season. That's relatively talented, like a mid-tier. I think it's fair to say Louisville's kind of right in the middle in the ACC. Malik Cunningham's a good player. Jordan Travis goes down for Florida State. Backup comes in. They figure out a way to win that game on the road. Louisville fans might say they figured out a way to lose it. Wouldn't necessarily disagree. But that was a massive win. To me, it's those kind of games that make a difference, that make a massive difference in a program looking to get back to where it was, looking to restore order in a lot of ways, right? And Florida State is that program. Virginia Tech is that program that hasn't been able to do it. Nebraska certainly hadn't been able to do it. Miami, not able to do it so far this season. It's not always just the marquee games. It's those lower tier games that we don't talk about maybe a bunch, that are easy to ignore if that program loses them. To say, oh yeah, that's not the same program, man. Florida State being a 7-point favorite at home against Wake Forest. And I said it last week, the fact that Wake was only a 7.5-point underdog at home to Clemson, and they're number 5 in the country. Crazy to me. Wake Forest is different. They deserve a bunch of credit. They were right there to win that game last week. Sam Hartman's a heck of a quarterback. Dave Clawson's a heck of a coach. Florida State, I think, will feel like they are a lot further away from getting back to restoring that program if they don't win this game. Florida State's own fan base I'm talking about. The program from within, I think it would be a much more difficult loss to swallow right now for Florida State than it will be a win to gain a ton of momentum. And then it would be against, even if it was Virginia Tech, who's ranked number 22 in the country. Just what Wake Forest is, I think. And maybe I'm not adjusting my line of thinking and it's too old school and stuck in my ways, but I think that's reality. It's like I was saying, if Clemson had lost that game last week, I'd take them out of the elite. You can't lose to Wake Forest and be an elite program. Again, Wake, tremendous. They deserve a ton of credit. Program, wide receivers and quarterbacks, especially in the last several years, really impressive. Defensively is probably where they've made even more strides. I know they gave up a ton of points last week, but just the fact that they have been able to compete how they've been able to compete, deserve a ton of credit. Florida State deserves a ton of credit this year for getting back into the conversation. Fascinating game here, 3:30 Saturday afternoon. Yeah, first time since 2015 I saw Troy last week that Florida State fans sold out. Again, this goes back to, you got to credit Gamecock fans. 3 straight sellouts. Georgia, Florida, and Carolina, the only 100% attendance in the SEC. Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin begging on social media to get people in the stadium. Can't do it. To the sellout level that SEC football fan bases are going to have the reputation to be. Florida State's a football school, and yet with the dumpster fire that it's been the last several years, first sellout in near forever. Josh says, curious to see how full the stadium in Tallahassee will be. Should be a close game. If it's not a sellout, Florida State's program still going to have a long way to go. I mean, that will tell me a lot about what they think about their program. Obviously, the standard was ridiculous. 13 straight top 5 finishes under Bobby Bowden? Crazy. So big game there in Tallahassee going on the same time as Alabama, Arkansas on Saturday. 30 minutes after those games kick, you'll get Texas A&M, Mississippi State as well. So tremendous afternoon, just chock full. 3 really good games. I love this matchup so much. I don't know if there's a matchup of college football programs out there. I guess you could throw Alabama in here against Mississippi State, right? I love Mike Leach from a distance. I'm sure if I had to cover him every single day, I would grow frustrated, or maybe the routine or the persona would get a little old, right? But Mike Leach from a distance is just a joy. Every now and again, he'll talk about aliens or mascots and just go on random tangents, but it is kind of monotone, and it would drive me nuts probably if it was a 365 day a year deal following him. And then Jimbo Fisher is so easy not to like, in my opinion. Love that he went after Saban, but the fast talking and how it blew up at Florida State, the Appalachian State loss was fantastic. Now coming back and bouncing back from that with two big wins. Just absolutely surviving against Arkansas. All right, what does Texas A&M do now? On the cusp of the college football playoff a couple of years ago, last year, beat Alabama and yet lose 4 other games, including Mississippi State. Jimbo's offense has been a massive concern at Texas A&M. Switch quarterbacks, didn't see a ton of improvement with Max Johnson last week. How do Will Rogers and company, how does the air raid do this year against A&M? What kind of adjustments do they have for Mike Leach and company? Another wildly entertaining game. If I had to rank them, I would put this one number 1. I'd put Wake and Florida State number 2, Alabama, Arkansas number 3. And that can get switched real quick, only because I feel like those first 2 will be more competitive than that Alabama-Arkansas game. I'm afraid that one's just going to be a grinded-out game where Alabama nullifies the Arkansas run game, and yet they're still going to try to do what they do, to run the football. Not going to have a ton of success. I don't think we're going to see a ton of points scored in that one. I would take the under on it. But with that being said, then KJ Jefferson will probably come out empty set, just throw it the entire game, throw it 700 times. He can throw it. That's a massive misconception, by the way, that you can't trust KJ Jefferson to throw the football or that he can't beat you with his arm. That's wrong. But you can't beat Texas A&M last week, neutral field. You do come home, but you got Alabama. And I think this will tell me what I need to know about Alabama this year. If they don't cover this spread, 17.5, I know it's a big spread. I mean, if they win the game by 17, I still think they are an elite team and they deserve to be separated like Georgia from everybody else. They don't do that, especially with Arkansas giving up as many points as they did to Carolina, not being able to beat Texas A&M, a team that is not close to the elite. When you lose to App State at home, you're not an elite football program. So if Alabama can't handle Arkansas convincingly, to me, they're getting close to drifting back to the pack. Or maybe I separate Georgia and give them more credit and put Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Michigan, maybe right now in that next tier. How I'm seeing it. Steven, Texas A&M can't depend on Homer Simpson this week. The dough. Oh, man. I again, didn't know it was possible to hit the top of the upright on a field goal and for it to bounce back. Craig says, Bama's given up 2 touchdowns. They only gave up They give both up against Texas. Craig? I mean, Vandy last week. I get not giving up a touchdown there. We'll see how they do against Arkansas. Let's put it that way. Going to Texas and escaping barely after you knock the quarterback out. To me, knocked Bama down a peg. Obviously, took them to number 2 in the country. There's a reason, though, it's 17.5 here. I think Vegas obviously expecting a convincing win against Arkansas on the road. We've talked about this one already a little bit, I know. Just wanted to reiterate the night schedule as well. I think 3 more really interesting games. LSU at Auburn. LSU a 9-point road favorite here. Just kind of shows you how little respect Vegas has for Brian Harsin and company. Missouri should have won that game last week. They're hosting Georgia as a 28-point dog. Might make you feel a little bit better from the Gamecock perspective. That spread was 24.5, right? But this appears to be clearing away the headliner on Saturday night. We've seen Clemson turn this one into a laugher before, where NC State got a bunch of hype and supposed to be a challenge for Clemson, and then Clemson has looked like an elite program, and NC State not even close. We've seen times where NC State has snuck up on Clemson, even pulled off the upset, right? To me, this is massively important for DJU specifically, but Clemson through him, if that makes any sense. You get a second straight game where you look like the elite quarterback you're supposed to look like, that you did look like in 2 games in your first year, that you were supposed to be last year, and you never were close. You've already thrown more touchdowns this year than you did all of last year. Uyunglele deserves a bunch of credit for that. Doing it at home against NC State. You do it 2 straight weeks. Then Clemson, I think, can really feel like it's back to a lot closer to what it was going into last season than what it turned out to be last season. You can't do that. You get another uneven performance or another marginal to not great performance from your quarterback. I think you're kind of back to what you were last year in a lot of ways. Yeah, Craig, about Alabama, they really haven't played anybody but Texas, and it's not like Texas seems to be a tremendous team this year. Great Texas Tech upset last week, wasn't it? Shocking fumble. Bijan Robinson's one of the best in the country, if not the best. The fact that he fumbles, I think it was the first carry, too, in overtime. Then I thought Texas Tech was going to mess around and lose that game. Watching it with my kids, and my 9-year-old is really analytical. He said, why don't they just kick the field goal? Then the fact that they moved it over to that left hash and had a weird angle, I was afraid they were going to blow it. Love to see that upset. And another article I was reading, really interesting too, and something to look for. I guess this article I read, there is a service out there, an analytics service that both Texas Tech and Texas, I think, subscribe to, that makes a book for you that comes up with all the analytics that you can check this book during the game. There's somebody in charge on every staff. If you subscribe to this analytics service, would be interesting to hear if Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks do it. I'm guessing he'll be asked about it at some point this year, maybe now that this info is out there. But this is the trend in not just college football, but the NFL as well, right? About 4th down percentages and when you should go for it and when you should not. With the prevailing wisdom for decades and decades, right? You got to be conservative. You got to punt the football if it's 4th down, even if it's 4th down and very manageable near midfield because you don't want to turn it over, give the other opponent a short field. The risk versus reward, the risk of going for it too high. Well, actually, the analytics have shown the numbers. If you really crunch the data, right? Actually, it's the reward is the higher percentage play there. It is worth the risk a lot of time. And so I guess, is it Joey McGuire, their new head coach, came from Baylor, and Dave Aranda is a really kind of analytics-driven guy. If you've ever heard him talk, you can it translates to me like, hey, this guy is a numbers guy. He's definitely not a big personality guy. But that's where he learned it. And this service prepares a book for these coaches that very definitively gives them a yes or no about whether to go for it in certain situations, like how many points you're down, what the down and distance is, what the time in the game is. Somebody's in charge of making sure that they know exactly what the data is telling them to do. And then obviously coaches do have to use a little bit of feel here, right? You got to know your team. You got to know what you see with your eyes as well. This is why coaches get paid to make these decisions. This is what I always thought Ray Tanner was the best at in college baseball, especially towards the end of his career, knowing what button to push, when to put a pinch hitter in, throw a pinch runner in there, when to put players in motion, when to bring Matt Price on to close out a game. The numbers can tell you one thing, but you got to take all the information into account, including years and years of experience as a coach, and make those decisions. And I'm really encouraged. I was really encouraged to read this article because it's kind of where we are in 2022, right? It's not a completely numbers-driven deal. I don't think we're going to see football coaches go the way that baseball has gone recently and say, yeah, well, we've been looking at the exit velocity and the launch angle and the spin rate and the whole thing. It's not an analytics-driven sport, but clearly there are some advantages to using this data, because I think, don't we all love watching fourth down, watching teams go for it on fourth down? It's so much more interesting than watching consistent punts and trying to pin guys inside the 10-yard line and then get the ball back, right? There was one example in this game where Texas Tech did go for it early on, I think, and they didn't get it. And they ended up getting the ball right back. I think it was right around their own 40-ish yard line. They ended up going for it, gave Texas a short field. It might have been the other 40-ish yard line. And whatever it was, Texas, I think, ended up with a fourth down on like the 32-yard line. They went for it, and they didn't get it. So what has been underappreciated, I think, is just the message it sends your team, the confidence that it sends your team and program that, hey, we're going to go for it. Confidence on both offense and defense, right? We're confident enough on offense that you can get it. And we know if we don't, our defense is going to be able to stop the other team. I don't think you can't put a number on that. You can't quantify that injection of confidence that you shoot directly into the veins of your team when you go for those things. Even if it doesn't work out, you're still confident that your defense is going to get it back, right? It's obviously not ideal, but if you do go for it, you do get it. I mean, man, it's a double shot of confidence for both your offense and defense that you made that call. And I think in the same way you can't quantify that, also the message that it sends to your team on the other side. Hey, we really know our punter is good at pinning them inside the 10-yard line. That's the message that you're sending in football, especially when you're at home, right? With your crowd telling you to. Now, there is also the fact that you can't be just in my mind, a meathead. Hey, go for it. Right? They said go for it. I feel everybody wants us to go for it. We got to go for it here. You can't be that coach either, right? You got to be smart about it. You got to be able to say, guys, I hear you. I know you want to go for it. I want to go for it as well. Not the smart move here. We got to make the smart play. But you got to be smart about everything it means to your team, I think. And having the mentality that, we trust you, both on offense and defense. We trust you to get the first down. We trust you if we don't get the first down. And that thing, I think, means so much in football, so much to your program. I think that's the only way a lot of programs that aren't elite can win games against elite teams. And Texas is not an elite team, don't get me wrong. And it's like when Steve Spurrier and South Carolina played at Auburn 2014, right? Dylan Thompson called it like almost a perfect game called by Steve Spurrier. But he knew he had to go for it on fourth down going in, right? He knew they weren't going to be able to slow down Auburn that much. And just the momentum that gave the offense in that game. You saw it, feel it. It was fascinating to watch. The fact that more coaches don't do that more often, to me, has been a miss on the conservative side. And I think we're going to continue to see more and more programs go to this service, and where the numbers, there will be data behind these decisions, to where I guess coaches might feel a little bit secure making those decisions, knowing the post-game press conference they can say, yeah, the book told us to go for it. Didn't work out this time. Do it every single time. I'd do it again. I'm confident in our guys. Well, you can only say that so many times and it not work out, right? But I'm hopeful that we're going to see that as a bit of a trend, that only gain momentum, because it makes a lot of sense. You got to use the numbers, the data that's available. Then you also can't let that completely rule your decisions, right? You got to have some kind of real happy medium in there. And South Carolina seems to have been pretty good. Shane Beamer's pretty vocal about, telling Marcus Satterfield on third down, you're going to have two plays here because we want to go for it. I think that's what you might have seen or heard after that Georgia game as well, where the book's telling him, all right, if it's going to be 4th and 4-ish, we're going to go for it here. South Carolina ends up losing yards and they end up punting, because I think the book switches on you, right? 4th and 8, you don't go for it. 4th and 4, you do go for it. Big difference in the percentage chance that you have of picking up 4 yards or 8 yards, especially against a Georgia defense. That's why there's this service, because it's specifically developing the data around both teams, that specific offense versus that specific defense. Fascinating stuff, man. All right, back to tonight. Anybody want to throw out a prediction before we get out of here in the last few minutes? Would love to hear it. But I think it's one of those games where I haven't seen a close one. And I think if you do predict a close one from the Gamecock perspective, you are a negative Nelly in a big way. DC, I'm surprised. I don't know if we've gotten a score prediction from DC today, because he's been the saltiest of the group, right? Was Craig joining him last week? I think Craig feels a little bit better, or at least has been keeping this saltiness to himself so far this week. Maybe a Marshawn Lloyd hurdle and 160 plus yards, 295 yards rushing, and more than 500 yards total offense helped make that happen. And I don't even know if I mentioned it on Monday. South Carolina did exactly what I think they needed to do. Going into that Charlotte game, I said, limit Charlotte to 20 points or less, exactly 20. Get more than 450 yards of offense, almost got 550, and win the game comfortably. That's what they did. Didn't look like they were going to do that in the first half, right? Or after the first half. Massive third quarter changed that real quick. 42-14 Carolina tonight for DC. Okay. If that's a 42-0 after the third quarter and those 14 come in the fourth quarter, I'm guessing DC will feel pretty good about it. If it's 17-14 at half and then the Gamecocks go on to make it much more comfortable in the second half, that would be different, right? That's why the scores to me, when there's that much disparity in the final, there are really a massive different feelings you can get out of those scores depending on how the game goes. Yeah. Again, so last week it was limit Charlotte to 20 or less and really get the offense going with 450 plus. Tonight, it's different, I think, for Carolina. After having that performance, now it is much more about the first half. And that needs to be the next step for the Gamecock offense, especially after not looking tremendously impressive last week's first half. Asserting your will immediately against an inferior opponent is what has to happen for the Gamecock. To me, that means 3 points or less for SC State in the first quarter, 10 or less in the first half, and your offense needs to have scored 24 or more points by halftime. That's what I see as the barometer for this game. No weather puns intended. Obviously, a serious weather situation in our country and I guess region from the Southeast perspective that has led us to tonight's Thursday night game, moving it up a couple of days. And hope everyone continues to stay safe, especially if you have loved ones in the Florida areas that have been hit by this thing. We are fortunate in that we've kind of benefited from the football standpoint that we get football a couple of days early here. Looks like it's going to be a nice night for football. The night environment, always fun. Thursday night games, always fun. From the Gamecock perspective, I guess maybe minus that Texas A&M game, 2014, to start the season. So we got that, and then we've got the Saturday slate to really get into. Tomorrow should be a fun show, talking about what we saw tonight, digesting it, and then how that makes you feel moving forward. Because that's what this thing's about. It's not just about tonight. It's not a typical game in that fashion. It is about setting yourself up in the best way possible to move forward in the 7 games that will define the 2022 season, with 6 SEC games coming up in Clemson. Massive game at Kentucky a week from Saturday, where now you'll have a couple of extra days to prepare, to not only prepare a game plan, but also to recover, to get guys healthy. Seems like the defense is much healthier. Dylan Wanham will be out. I see Darius Rush is out tonight as well. From Shane Beamer's, I believe he did the radio show last night. So those are that's the latest word going into tonight. Everybody else should be at least available to some degree. Oh, DC, you got a long day today, so you're off tomorrow. You're already saying peace out, see y'all Monday. Okay, fair enough, sir. Appreciate all the input and participation as always on the show. The Roger, Craig, Steven, Troy, Josh, most recently. Thank you guys for being a part of the show, driving this show, helping to drive this show. Really looking forward to football tonight. Rare Thursday night adjusted game. Add it to the list, right, of things that have been odd around South Carolina football in the last several years. It was the pushed back Hurricane game against Georgia to a Sunday. Then it was the COVID year where you got a ghost town around Williams-Brice Stadium, limited capacity. Now we've got a moved up Thursday night game against SC State. College football, you never know. Football Thursday is exactly right, Jason. You guys enjoy it. I know I'm going to, and looking forward to talking about it with you tomorrow. Thanks for being a part of the program. That'll do it. September 29th edition. Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent. 63-10 RL. Wow.